Welcome back to the Confidence Podcast. Super excited. Two of my favorite guys from the Enneagram community.
What?
I have with me today Jim Zartman and Joel Hubbard, the founders of The Art of Growth. Jim is the co-founder of The Art of Growth, a transformative platform specializing in Enneagram-based personality and emotional intelligence coaching. With over 2 decades of leadership experience, Jim empowers individuals from Fortune 100 executives to those seeking an intentionally designed life. As a certified Enneagram coach and passionate autodidact, Jim's passion and intensity propels him to the forefront of his field. His journey began in his teens, fueled by curiosity about personality, nuances, sparking a lifelong quest in self-discovery and understanding human diversity. This passion evolved into a globally impactful podcast and coaching venture. Welcome to Total Confidence Podcast, Jim.
Thanks, man.
Did I say autodidact correct?
Yeah, sure. Like honestly, like bios are one of those really weird things that I don't think any of us feel comfortable with. So it's like, I list a bunch of stuff into Chat GPT and let it spit out my bio.
you know, everybody cringes when I do this.
But
gotta
be real, man. Gotta be real.
Well, welcome. And I have with me Joel Hubbard, the co-founder of The Art of Growth, an Enneagram thought leader and certified coach, advocating for personal growth and transformation. His work is guided by the belief that every individual possesses the power to overcome self-sabotaging habits and limitations. Several years ago, while struggling with burnout from his role in the ministry, the Enneagram provided Joel with the tools to take control of his life, rekindle his passions, and find a renewed sense of purpose. Through The Art of Growth, Joel found his true calling in helping teams foster effective communication, collaboration, and positive work environments. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad we got past that. It's
all right now. Yeah,
get on to the good stuff.
All right, that's over. Yeah, sigh of relief. Bios are over.
Look, everybody cringes, but y'all the first person who says something. Everybody kind of like has this awkward laugh. So now I kind of understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's one of those weird things. Like we work in the Enneagram world, right? So you're wanting to sum up something about yourself. You're wanting to say something about who you are and what you care about and what matters to you, what you're driven by. And it just ends up coming out like this weird, like I've never read a bio that I was like, yeah, that sounds totally natural.
Right.
That's a good snapshot of what that person's like as a human being. Like,
it's just so awkward to have to like conversations where it's at. Like if you're going to know somebody, it's so much better to have that. But we know we have to have descriptions for people that are visiting our sites, our website. But yeah.
Let's move on to the good stuff.
That was good.
I feel like we should make you read your bio. I feel like you should have to read your bio now.
Oh my god, no, that's painful. So I'll start with you, Joel. Like, how did you discover the Enneagram, and what was your first impression of it?
Well, it's when I first heard of it, it was way before I actually really started following it. I had some friends that I respected who I thought were really, great people. One was a mentor of mine. And so I took a kind of a cursory look at it and thought, this stuff seems weird, seems forced. And so I don't know. It didn't click for me. I tried, and then I gave up on it. And then probably a good 8 years later, when I was going through burnout, as you read in the bio there, I ran into, I don't even remember how, but I ran into the podcast, the only one I think out there at the time, and The Road Back to You with Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile. And I don't know why, but that, for whatever reason, that was just like, there's something there. I need to follow that. I need to listen to that. And I was drawn. I was very much pulled into it. And so then I'd been reading Richard Rohr for quite some time before then, good 5 years, even before I knew that he had written on the Enneagram. And then I found out he had, so I read his book on it. That's kind of how it brought me to, a point of like looking seriously at this system, but it felt like it was looking back at me, which is why I didn't really feel like, it wasn't one of those things where I looked at it and said, oh, this is another fun tool. It was more of like, if this is a powerful tool, and and I have mixed reactions to it. On one hand, it's a wow, yeah, I love it, and then on the other hand, I don't like the fact that it's exposing some things about me. So it took me a little longer to really finally go, okay, I'm ready to talk about it. I kind of was quiet about what I read. When I read my type, it's like, nah, I don't like this at all. And so it took me a little bit longer to finally say, all right, I think this is my core motivation. I think I can be vulnerable and admit what's going on here.
Understood. What about you, Jim? How did you discover the Enneagram, and what was your first impression?
I'm not exactly sure, because there was so many different systems that I was curious about for a long time. I remember my first real discussion with it was like driving in the car with some friends back when I lived in Cincinnati, and talking about it, and what do you think this? What do you think about this? It's supposed to be this motivations thing. Like, what are you driven by? And I couldn't really see myself in any of them. And I think it's just one of those things where I don't have like a starting point. It was definitely an evolution. But I would say the point in which I was like all in was actually when we were recording the first season of the Enneagram Panels podcast, as we used to be called. And I was editing it. So I was like, experiencing all the types in slow motion. And there was something in that experience where I was very tuned into the pace of the speech, the way they talk, the intonation, the tone. So as an audio engineer and a musician, all of a sudden I was picking up on these nuances of how the energy was so different from these different people. And I think, yes, I experienced certain stuff that impacted me, and I've shared that story on our podcast and other places, but I think the place that stuck out to me as far as when I was into it as a system and seeing what it could do potentially for other people was in that experience, because I was getting an up close look at what it was like for all these different individuals. So I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes
but,
sense. It makes sense.
I actually don't know your answer to this question either. I would love to hear your answer.
Okay, so I was about 19, 20, and my cousin and I, we were in a rap group, and we were going over his house to practice, and he handed me a book by Helen Palmer and said, "Hey man, this book is called the Enneagram." That's how he pronounced it to me. He said, "I'm a 4, a tragic romantic. I think you're one too. You should read it." It's like, okay. So I read it, and I thought I was a 4. I was just like blown away. And then, of course, I don't stop at one book, right? So I go to the library. I probably still owe the library. They probably got a warrant for my arrest right there, because I got like all these books from the library I never returned. So I
Now,
went to the
when you
library.
started reading, when you started reading them, did you go into each of those books and read about the 4, or did you zoom out and start reading about all the types?
Oh, I got to read all of them. Yeah,
Okay.
I had to read all of them. So when I got the wisdom of the Enneagram, though, and I took the little test in the beginning, and then I read the 5, and I was like, okay, this is me, And so yeah, that started. I started studying on and off, and then I hooked up with. Fast forward to when I moved to Charlotte about 7 years ago. I hooked up with Ann Geary about 2017, and that's kind of what got me into the Enneagram community. Started studying with her. So yeah,
cool.
Yeah. So what led to your journeys and the formation of the Art of Growth, you guys working together. Like, how did y'all connect and decide to get so deep into this work, helping organizations and individuals? Yeah, I'll start with you, Joel.
Yeah, it's that's a big question. The starting point, it's always difficult, you know, when someone says, when did something start? For me, it's always difficult because I think of way back to like, what were the formational pieces? What got me to that point? And so, you know, without going into the very far back, I think that burnout was the greatest gift, because it got me to recognizing there were things I was doing that are both my personality type. So I did, you know, how was I contributing to my own burnout? That was a big question. And then what are the contextual factors? Like, am I in the right job? Am I doing the right things that really serve me, or that bring out the best of my gifts, my abilities? Or am I working from something that really isn't my strength? And so both of those questions I had to kind of work through. And I think for all of us, we go through a journey of going between, you know, the problem is external to the problem is all internal, you know, and then hopefully we come back to a mix of both, like, you know, with a more rational and open-hearted and open-minded observation of what's really happening. So that was helped by the Enneagram, realizing that I was doing a lot of things to myself, and then also coming to realization that running an organization like I was running was really not playing to my strengths. And so but we still didn't have any idea. I mean, Jim was my assistant pastor at the church I was pastoring. And so we were both like, you know, doing a lot of things together. And as I began running into the Enneagram and talking to him about it, then I, after kind of sort of on the back end of my burnout, when I was coming through it, I went for certification at the narrative tradition under Helen Palmer. And part of what I needed to do was these panel interviewing, you know, a few of the same type. And Jim suggested, why don't we put these up on podcast and see what happens? And, you know, never imagining anything would happen. But we put them up on podcast, and then he says to me, hey, so after a couple of weeks, we've got quite a few downloads, more than anything we've ever done before. And so that took us to where we started getting calls from people around the country and saying, hey, do you coach? So that kind of propelled me towards what I was starting to feel like I was supposed to be doing, was more of the coaching piece. And as I did it, I found a different form of energy. Like, it wasn't more or less energy. It was more like a deeper quality and a more enriching kind of energy. I felt good. Like, I felt peaceful, restful. I felt wholehearted when I engaged in coaching. And so, so we started doing that as a sort of side hustle.
Okay.
And yeah, I'll let Jim fill in what his part of it was. And but that led eventually to us going all in to starting the Art of Growth. So
yeah, and I'm always trying to think of how can I answer this in a way that would actually be helpful to someone else, instead of just being like my interpretation of my own story, because I feel like that's what it often is. It's I'm putting my origin story or this through a particular filter. And honestly, I think it was just, I'm curious about this. Let's do more with it. So, hey, let's make a podcast season. Hey, people seem to be listening to this. Let's make another one. A lot of people are listening to this. Joel, you should set up a website. We're starting to reach a point where there's a lot more people and we're going in so many different directions. So we sit down with a friend of mine, and she names us the Art of Growth. She came up with that and said, here's some first steps for starting a business. I was like, oh, okay, I guess we're starting a business now. So it's never been like I think ultimately what it is like following curiosity and seeing if people ask you to do more. And then trying to put structure around your passion. Because honestly, like as a business, we usually feel like we still have no idea what we're doing, but we're still trying to follow. We're interested in this. Oh, we just met with this team on Monday, this team we were coaching, and we were so fascinated by everyone in the room and the dynamics and the types and how they were interacting with each other and conflict. And we're just fascinated by it. And I think that has always birthed the next iteration of whatever we have done. We did the first season, we were fascinated. We started meeting with more people, we were fascinated. We spent a bunch of time working with a group that's in sobriety, and it was like every single thing has been an education. And that's why we always like say we will never be Enneagram experts, because we don't think you can be.
Yeah.
We'll always be curious and learning, and it's just been the fascination of the learning that I think has propelled every step that we've taken, and still is, like, because we still feel like we have well, I can only speak for Joel. I feel like I still have no idea what I'm doing, and every single experience of sitting in front of someone who I consider the real expert in themselves and in their type are the teacher, and we're reflecting back and interacting with them in a way to explore it together.
I just had to say this about both of you guys. You're so down to earth. I had no idea. Especially with your podcast was so successful. Because you guys don't carry it with huge egos, and so when you're saying that resonated with me. And even just meeting you guys in San Francisco, you just guys are like so down to earth. You see so many big egos and everything. And Joel, I'm curious about this, man. Transitioning from ministry, like what was that like? Because you're directing an organization and you're going in a totally different direction with this weird sign and numbers and like, how was that transition?
Perfectly smooth, right?
Yeah. It was
No conflict, totally normal.
Nobody thought it was a pentagram with
Cultic symbols.
Yeah. No, it was I wish I could say it was easy or when I tell stories now, I do my best to try to tell stories that reveal more of how I was in that moment than sort of the reflection kind of thing, because reflecting, man, I can make myself sound either really like I thought it through, it was all planned, but that's bullshit. And I hate it now more than ever, because I hate it in myself, but I also recognize, like, you don't help people by doing that. Like, when you're in it, you don't know, you're just sort of exploring. And if you're doing life right, you're kind of, you have a sense that you're going in the right direction, but man, you have big questions. And I think big questions should guide us. So yes, it was very messy. I didn't do things very wisely at times. I definitely made some mistakes, didn't really help people in the process of understanding I was changing and transforming and going through my own internal work. And I think now I try to be a bit more communicative about it, particularly with my wife, and then with others around me. But yeah, it was messy. I mean, the minister, the church itself, was split. People, and I wouldn't say split in half. It was more of like there were splits. There were some who thought it was like, what are you doing, going into some demonic thing, and that's very much the part of the sort of religious mindset, and fearful in that way. And others who were like, I just see this as a distraction, you're chasing another new thing. And it's like, okay, yeah, you've seen that in me for sure as a 7, undoubtedly. And others who really saw it as like, this is going to help my own development, my own growth. So it's kind of a mix of a lot of that, with even more variety than even what I've mentioned there. But that's sort of what it was like. And but I knew that for me, it was producing fruit. Like, I was more peaceful. I was like, people around me were telling me I was a better person to be around. So for me, I looked at it as, if I'm becoming a better person as a result of this, then I need to continue. going in this direction. Yeah. So, and, again, it was messy. I wish it was a lot smoother than it was. And I've had to go back and apologize to some people for being, for pulling them in my ever changing 7 ways of, ooh, new idea, ooh, new thing.
Yeah.
But then really they see now the longevity of this, and they're like, oh yeah, you're like, this is really changing you. And so some people have actually bought into it as a result of the fact that it's changed my life. So yeah.
And I'm going to use your comment about us being down to earth as an excuse to say this because I want to, which is like, there's a couple things about that. Like, one, all of us in the Enneagram, this is still a pretty small world. We want to have an impact on the way that businesses operate, government operates, like individuals treat themselves and their relationships. Like, all of us in the Enneagram, we want to have that impact on things, but this is still a very small world. This tool is not being used to the extent that any of us want to see it be used. And so none of us should have a big head because none of us are having the kind of influence with this tool and seeing it impact the world the way we want to see it. And the second thing is, like, yes, Joel and I have had a successful podcast, but we are still, I consider us still pretty new to this world in general. And there's a lot of people who have come before us. There's who have been doing this for, 40, 50 years. And like, we are taking their learnings and trying to take it to the next place. But like, we are just part of this thing. And there will be people who come after us who do it much better and who take it to the next step. So all of us are just like little pieces in this thing. And I think one of the things that I actually got upset with, and I think I shared another podcast about the IEA conference, was and just the Enneagram world in general, is I have seen some of that, like the egos flaring and people defending their theory and stuff like that. I'm like, y'all, like, stop. There's supposed to be a mission here. This is not helpful. So just drop it. Yeah. Let's move on with our lives. If you need a little pat on the back, and then let's like move on with the mission, because like, it's supposed to be here to affect lives, not to defend theories. All right, I'll get off my soapbox now.
That's good. I had a conversation with an Enneagram teacher before with that. Like, if we're both opening up a hospital and people are sick, why are you concerned about me opening up my hospital?
Very good. That's very good. Yeah.
So that does exist. I've dealt with it firsthand.
Yeah.
So that's you talked about the accidental success of the podcast, and again, y'all just going with being curious and just kind of following this path. Why do you think your work then resonated and continues to resonate with so many people?
Yeah. Well, I think you've mentioned a couple of things. We don't know until we hear back from people. It's like, is what we're saying, because it's interesting to us. But that doesn't mean anything. Where if it's, I mean, it does mean something. Like, I believe in doing things that you love first. You have to love what you're doing, and then hopefully it intersects with the needs of other people. And if it does, then you've got something. And what we were hearing from folks was, you're making it, there was a few things. One is you're making it accessible. That was a big thing. A lot of the language that was being used and has been used to speak of the Enneagram is technical language.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sort of psychological lingo, technical language, and it's good. I mean, I can reference those books and say, these are good books, man. I cut my teeth on this stuff. And I still think it's just excellent work, but it's not as accessible. And so our work was to take complexities, and it's always been my love to do this anyways. I was a terrible student. I barely passed my, any grade that I was in. The teachers were just happy. I think they passed me just to get rid of me. But I'm a terrible student. I just don't learn the way most people learn. And so for me, I felt like if I can make things accessible that's like serving my own inner child that needed that in school, that didn't get it.
Yeah.
And serving the world. I think that's a win-win. I love it when people go, oh man, I get it. Right. So that was a huge thing for me. But I think the other piece too is the gentleness that people say we approach others with, and the sort of how we're, no judgment. There's like space for people to be who they are. That's a huge value for me. I want to normalize, because anything that does not normalize and doesn't, even if we're afraid to say that it's normal, someone's behavior, it's just create space, grace for them. And so that's been important to us, and people have reflected back that that's something they feel drawn to our podcast, because they feel that with us interviewing people, and as a result they feel it themselves, like I feel welcomed in. So those are two things. What else, Jim? There's some other things maybe you've heard.
I think the thing that resonated first off the bat is no one had put panels in the podcast world.
Oh yeah.
This idea that's just so rich to the narrative tradition, and why I gravitated towards the narrative tradition is this entire concept of self-reporting and letting people speak for themselves. I recently went back and listened to the very first episode we ever posted, and like that was the ethos that we were saying we were going for. And I like that we are still going for that. So we are still putting people up to speak for themselves, again, letting them be the experts that we are learning from, that being very core to our approach in how we do this. And also, even when it's a podcast, it's just the two of us. We're doing this series right now, and it's just the two of us talking about it, but it's so much of the behind the scenes, what we've learned from coaching this type. Being able to share some experiences and things that are the behind the scenes that, people might not say in a podcast because they want to keep that anonymous, but it's still a helpful learning. And it's just like defaulting to others and keeping that attitude of the learner's mind, I think has been a big part of the appeal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say this, I was on a part of, I think, 2 different panels on your show, and there was and I'm not saying this to blow smoke because y'all are right here, I'm just being real. There was a genuine curiosity that was there. Like I watched, you guys, when people were answering, and like, I've been doing this for a while, so y'all weren't checking out and just like, we got, you know what I mean? All right, cool. All right, this 5. All right, wrap it up 5. You genuinely were engaged. And I felt seen and felt heard. And I think that's the beauty of your podcast.
Well, one things we always tell people when they're going to be on the podcast, and it's the same thing we remember for ourselves, is that people are not there to listen to you or us. They're there to listen for themselves through you. They're there listening for their own benefit. It's about them. It's not about us. Like, we're not that interesting or smart or anything, but it's like laying the table for the setting for others to shine, and for people on the receiving end. Like, one of the best pieces of feedback I remember getting early on was someone who listened to one of the 5 panels and said, I have so much more love for my spouse after hearing the 5 panel. And we just go, bingo.
Yeah, that's it. To me, that's the ultimate reward. Like I absolutely love hearing people say, I felt seen. People that said, email us and say, I was crying as I was listening to your type 6 panel. For the first time, I feel like I'm not crazy, that there are people like me. And that's just so rich to us to establish that, like, hey, welcome to being human. Welcome to being part of what the struggle is for all of us. And to your point, Ahmad, I mean, I don't have to fake like I'm interested. I'm genuinely interested. Like, I love learning. And when a 5 says to me, hey, it's more like this for me, like, really? Like, it just blows me, because I think that is something that is, if we relax into our better selves, I think we're all curious about who each of us is. It's not just a unique feature of 7s or a unique feature of 8s or some other type or 5s to be curious. No, it's who we all are. But sometimes, just like I am with my wife, if we're, going through the day and we're not really interacting well, or we've had a couple of tiffs, I mean, it's just that the curiosity erodes very quickly and we're back to sort of self-preserving brains and in defense of each other. So it's kind of like, can we create a space through the podcast where we bring our best selves together and where we enter back into that space of humanizing each other, being curious about each other, learning about each other. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
We're in a weird time. I won't say weird. It's just the time where there's a lot of information. Like, everybody didn't have to go and loot the library like I did in the late 90s to get Enneagram books. We have the internet, podcasts. So it's good, but everything has its positive and negatives. What are some of the misconceptions? I'll start with you, Jim, that you hear, like pet peeve. Like, what is something you hear and you just kind of cringe that is being taught by all of the experts that are out here today?
I think the one thing I go to is just how reductionistic things can be. Because I read all these descriptions and I learned all these descriptions in all these different books, and then I started doing panels and none of the descriptions worked. They all partly worked, or they came close. But then, like Joel said, we start saying, well, how would you say it? How would you nuance this? How would you? And language is a product of culture. Language even creates culture. And so it's not a pet peeve. It's not an annoyance so much as it is that was a reflection of how they were naming it at that time. And they didn't have the internet or a really broad spectrum of type 5s to ask this question to. And so they would have been limited with the number of people. And so it's one of those things that I feel like the Enneagram is getting better because it's less reductionistic. It bothers me when I see, fours are just like this. I'm like, ooh, self-pres 4 isn't. Or I know these ones who came from this cultural background that wouldn't say that. The more core motivation is the same, but the way you're describing the way they're going to show up in the world, that doesn't work. And so I think it's anything like that bothers me the most.
Yeah. Yeah, I would, it's funny because the pet peeves show up when I'm teaching, when we're doing our certification course and I'm going through it. Then it comes out and I was like, oh yeah, right. I do dislike this a lot. Meme culture is definitely one. I hate it with everything in me. So anything that reduces, as Jim said, anything that reduces types to specific behavior or traits, to me, that just is we're missing the boat on that one. I think that this isn't, I would say, something that I don't think is a pet peeve, but something that I do believe we need to grow past is in the area of the instincts. I think that there's been most of the ways that people in books that authors have described types have been from a particular instinct plus the type. And so, for example, people have said, type 1s are hardworking and detail-oriented. Well, we've typed at this point thousands of type 1s from across the globe. So it's not just like, US. So we're getting a flavor. And it's not true of all the type 1s. So that's one of the things that you begin to recognize that, oh, wow, yeah, that's been unhelpful if they would have read that description to land on their type. Had many self-proclaimed type 1s who, for them, the core motivation to be good, to not be caught, cutting corners, to have integrity, words and actions that match, and all this stuff that's really core to the type 1, this need to be good, this driver is, they resonate with that. But when it comes to laziness, or they'll say, oh, I'm definitely I'm not like the hard driving self-pres one, that you're describing. I'm not that way. But do I have an attention towards improvement? Oh yeah, and towards being good all the time. So that's something that I think we need to relax into, is a little bit more looseness around that, and learning that there's this variety and diversity that can be helpful to understanding. There's I'm sure there's a lot more pet peeves that get generated when I'm having a conversation about something, or someone points something out. It's like, oh yeah, that one right there. But
we've even changed the language about how we've talked about it based on what
Yeah,
you're saying,
right.
Joel, right now. So a lot of times, and I think even when we first started teaching, we'd be like, type ones are like this.
Yeah.
And now we've actually changed our language. We say many type ones report to us based on this core motivation that they show up like this. Does that resonate with you if you're resonating with the type one? And then it doesn't put them in this binary of I am, I'm not, a yes, no, or I have to be like that to say yes. It just frees them up of all of that.
Yeah.
And they can say, well, I really relate to this and this and this. I relate to 8 out of these 10 things, right? One of them not ready to face, and one of them's just not me because of some nuance or cultural overlay or whatever the case may be. And so like avoiding that reductionistic approach in the language we're using. So a lot of ones report to us that this is the case. How do you see that? Like, do you resonate with this? How would you language this differently? A, that keeps them from closing down. B, it keeps us in learning mode. And C, it keeps a tool what it should be, which is constantly evolving.
Oh, and I have another one, Ahmad. Bypassing. Spiritual bypassing. As it's been said. That's a pet peeve. And I think it shows up a lot with, like you were saying, the sort of big egos that show up sometimes. In the world of any world, by the way. So it's not just the world of the Enneagram. It's any world that you're part of where there's so-called experts. It shows up there. It's just another way of avoiding. And I'm tempted by that as well. Any given time when we have people that reach out to us and they say, "Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm talking to a celebrity," and all this. It's like, yeah, okay, sure, I can start to feel like I'm doing pretty well, right? And no, I can't let myself go there. And so I come back to the truth about who I am, where I'm at. And so I'm regularly now letting people know, as soon as they like fall in love with us and want to be around us and intern for us. And it's like, okay, let me tell you who I am.
Let me tell you what's going to annoy the crap
out
of you around us.
It's like, and still they won't hear it because they're still so, they might be a little starstruck or whatever, and they won't hear it. But it's like, no, I'm going to disappoint you. I'm going to let you down. You're going to see all of this stuff because that's real.
Yeah.
And so that's a way to kind of work against my own temptation around this. And so yeah, I think it's harder. The more followers you have, the more popularity you gain, the harder it is to not bypass your own journey. I think that's why I also have compassion for people. It's like, yeah, I know how hard it is when you get to those heights, and we're not even close to the heights some of these people are at, and it's like, yeah, it is hard, but you have to work that much harder, because otherwise you set people up for this sort of like, wanting to follow other leaders and wanting them to tell them, give them the goods, and have this sort of, you tell me how to live my life, you fix me kind of stuff. And it's like, no. You have to do your own journey. You have to be the hero of your own journey, right? All of us do. Yeah. And we need our own band of heroes, people that come around us and say, you know what, we're gonna go through this with you. Yeah, that's important too. But
Joel, do you have that inner cringe when someone calls you an expert?
Yeah, because I feel like, ooh, that's gonna set me. I'm gonna fail big.
There's no way I can live up to that.
Yeah. It's only downhill from here. Yeah,
I'm gonna disappoint you horribly.
That's right. If we start it like you think I'm crap, good. Now I can work up from
You're probably decent enough to talk to. Okay, now we can start something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
because
also laughing.
You have to start walking like with this, you have to start
Oh,
posing,
God.
man, when you buy into that stuff, man. And it's just
Right.
Oh, one we didn't even mention, Joel, which is like the thing we hate the most in any universe, which is guruism.
oh my God.
Yeah.
Hate guruism.
Yeah.
I was laughing to myself for a second because I was like, you could name this episode something really clickbaity, like what the Art of Growth hates about the Enneagram.
Hey, I like that.
Let's just keep going with that one. I mean, we got lots on this.
Talk about all the things that drive us crazy.
Yeah.
Now, as a social five, and our name given to us is totem, and I default in loving gurus, right? So when I started studying with the narrative Enneagram, I didn't think I would like it because, like, where are the gurus? But I fell in love with it because it was very healthy for me, because I unconsciously put my teachers on pedestals. And I'm aware of that now. Like, I love to just sit at the wise person's feet, you know what I mean? But it's funny that you said that, because the narrative tradition broke me out of that, or helped break me out of that, instead of having these big personalities who are going to disappoint. That they're useful, but even Russ Hudson said to me, he said, "Listen, man, don't look at none of us as your mom or dad." He said, "We're just your brothers or sisters giving you advice before you go on a date." He said, "That's how you got to look at all of our all these teachers and stuff." So that helped me.
That's good. Yeah, no, the narrative was very helpful to me too, because I went there. I went there because I liked the idea of that it's narrative tradition. So we're going to hear stories. That's how we're going to understand and learn the types. But I found myself also having a hard time with it, because as a head type, I prefer knowledge that's given to me by a competent person, someone who knows what they're talking about.
Yes.
And they're passing that on. I love that, because then I absorb and I absorb and I absorb, and I love all that stuff. And I found very competent people. My gosh, clearly so, at the narrative tradition. But they insisted on only teaching for a short period of time, and then immediately having panels come up and having people talk about themselves. And I found myself learning so much more than I ever anticipated learning. And I loved how they were sort of anti-guru there too. And it was very refreshing to be around that and recognize, like, everyone is a teacher. And if we're listening well, everyone is our teacher, and we can learn. So yeah, I do feel like everybody's our brother, and everybody's I love that. I think that's good.
It's so funny, as you're saying that, I realize, like, that's probably why we've structured everything we do the way we do. So, like, whether it's group coaching or a certification, we just do like the 15-minute teaching on a video that we send them ahead of time. It's like, get the teaching, get the information, great. And then when we come together, we're going to actually have the dialogue, because that's where 90% of the learning is. Like, I've had this phrase in my head for a long time. I said, we learn better in circles than we do in rows, where just sitting in rows facing one person at the front talking is just not the way that we really learn as humans. We learn in communities and circles. This idea that's been as long as humans have been around, of apprenticeship, like standing at the shoulder of someone and doing it with them. I think another thing that bothers me is so many, like, teachers they write and observe by themselves, and everything we do bounces off team. It bounces off other people. Hey, when this person said this, did you observe this? Did you observe this? Anything that we write is bounced off of at least each other, if not, Hillary or Suzanne or some of the other people in our circle, that we go, hey, what do you think of this? And they go, well, as a hard type, I'd nuance it this way. Or, as a head type this way, I feel like this is missing. And so we're always going, okay, yeah. Because one thing that bothers me is, so often I read type descriptions and it's so clearly from a particular type's perspective, right? Yeah. And so that can really skew the view. And then we can go deeper into that, which is something Joel was just talking about, which is, you know, in certain types with certain literature, there tends to be a demographic that is missing from a lot of the descriptions, like male twos.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something, you know, Jim and I were talking about that the other day because, again, we found out, we were surprised by it, finding out from Enneagram, our you know, teachers, Enneagram teachers who taught us, that the amount that we have coached and actually interviewed and done podcasts with is far more than the than most other Enneagram you know, coaches have done and teachers have done. And it's by luck. I mean, obviously, it's by luck. We did not plan this. We did not think that our podcast would do anything. But because it's given us all these voices, we just reflect those voices back out. We're not the experts, again, as Jim said. We're not the experts. So if someone, you know, listening to so the reason why people say, how are you so accurate? Like, we can type somebody, we can land a type. We do this in corporate all the time. And skeptical people, resistant people, and they will just, their mouths drop open and they're like, how in the world, right? So the other day, a type 1, I can feel his sexual instinct coming through. I know that that's his dominant instinct. I can feel it. And so I've done enough of this to be able to tell. And so I say to him, so I bet your girlfriend gets a lot of free advice from you on how she could do better in life. And I was just teasing him a little bit.
Yeah.
And he lost it. He was laughing so hard. He said, I will neither confirm that nor deny that. And but his resistance dropped. And he was like, all right, I'm sold, right? Because it's, well, how do I know that? Well, I don't know that from reading a book. I know that from how many I'm literally copying and pasting from what I heard. Like, I heard another one say this, sexual one, right?
Yeah.
I heard a 3 say that. So when I typed a 3 this week, I'm describing to her what other 3s have said, who I'm coaching. And she's like, oh my gosh, I feel so exposed. Like, she's like, that's so true. And right. So to us, we feel like the wisdom, this is just bringing out the wisdom from all around us, from all these people, and we get to be part of that. So we feel like we're curators. We take all this wisdom and we put it back out into the world as a service, as a gift. And so that's been hugely helpful. But that's, I think, the approach that has helped us anyways to get people to say, yeah, I really appreciate the nuance and because that's another thing we hear back on our podcast, the nuance around types. Like, you do not box them in. And that's something that draws a lot of folks as well. So
as we conclude, man, let's talk about your certification program. I'm just taking a lot from this because just what you're saying makes sense. And I always say that I need to know how this works in my real life.
Yes, 100%.
If it's not useful in my real life, and even me being someone, if, you know, with this knowledge and, you know, defaulting to this guru thing, like, yeah, but I need to know how to talk to my self-pres 4 daughter. You know what I'm saying? Or, you know, or my type 2 wife who's a heart type, you know what I'm saying? So I love what you said about circles and rows, Jim. It's just so useful, man. And I just have a greater appreciation for what you guys do. Even though it's counterintuitive, like I said, it's a social file. We love our gurus and stuff, but it's really healthy to have this in real life. But let's talk about your certification program. You know, Art of Growth. Who is this for, and what are the benefits of studying with you guys?
Thank you for asking. We're launching our next one. We're going to be opening up for registration fairly soon. So yeah, January, we start our new round of certification.
Insert ad here.
Yeah.
Oh man, sorry.
We'll have a link available for everyone. So yeah,
it'll be in the comments, show notes. I just always wanted to say that.
Show notes. Link
in the show notes. Yeah, I think so our certification is for people who want to deepen their understanding of the Enneagram and their use of the Enneagram. For me, it's always both and deeper understanding, better use of it. And so the people who have taken it in the past, many of them have taken it just simply because they wanted to know more. They wanted to grow. They wanted to understand how to use it. And others took it to begin their own coaching practices. And so that's what we have. We have practitioners, which is just people who want to learn more and deepen their both knowledge and also how, get better at using it. That's the practitioner's certification, and that's a 12-week process. And then there's the additional 3 weeks for those who want a coaching certification, and so we're doing that as well. The thing that I think is unique about how we approach it is that we have all the videos uploaded, so the teachings are available by video, so people can start listening to it right away, watching the videos right away. And then in the class, it's a fast moving, it's 3 hours, but it's a fast moving 3 hours because we have breakouts, we have exercises, we are working through the material. A lot of what we're doing is not just about the Enneagram, because that's becoming so available now for people that most people who come to us have already, some of them already had a sort of certifications elsewhere. So what they're coming to us is, they say to us, we love the way you use the Enneagram. We'd like to know how you're capable, how do you do that? So that's what I want to pass on to people is what we have learned and how we do our own coaching, how we do, panel interviews, all this stuff. We want to pass that on. We pass on our uniqueness. I think one of the strengths that we have is in the area of the instincts. And so that's a deep dive into that. How the instincts play around with each other, how they work together, why the two dominant instincts are what actually forms your subtype, as opposed to the single dominant instinct that some believe creates your subtype. So all of this and more. So that's a big part of what we do with the certification. And then at the end, what I do is I get involved in helping people to learn how to type really well. So this is my additional, I go above and beyond. I want people finishing this and being really comfortable with using the Enneagram. And so I shadow them. So I go in on calls and I help them, and people have loved that part because it has helped them to really get good at typing. And then same thing for coaching. I'm in on some of the coaching calls with our students, and that's been also hugely helpful for them. So.
And then one component that we're planning to add this year, which hopefully I'm not talking about this too preemptively, but we've gone through such a learning experience over the last few years working with corporate clients and corporate teams, and team dynamics and communication and trust and conflict, and how do they best learn the Enneagram. And so people who want to go, well, I'd love to work with corporations, or I even maybe have a couple corporations interested to have me come in and work with them, but like, what do you do? And how do you take them through a process and be like, okay, we've spent 3 years figuring this out. So here's what we do. Here's all of our materials. Take it, go for it. Because like we were saying earlier, we don't believe in competitiveness in this world. We're not trying to be like the gurus, not trying to be, you have access to companies and communities that trust you that have never heard of us. So, you go, be the ambassadors for this tool in your community and in the corporations that you have access to. Because I know a lot of people in the Enneagram world, they pull back from it being used in corporations, but we're like, man, you spend so much time there. Where else do you need like a key code for how to interact with people? And this was even a big amount of the thinking behind the app that we've been developing over the last year, which is, if I am a type 8 and I'm going in to meet with a type 3, how do I communicate with them in a way that limits that gap between my intent and the impact I have? Because when I look back at my own story, that's the thing that frustrates me the most, is I had an intent that was good.
Yeah.
And the impact I was having was like bowling people over. People wouldn't push back against me. Like as an 8, how I just bulldozed over situations, how some people thrived under me and other people crumbled because there was just too much pressure I put on them. Like all of the stuff that I messed up on throughout leading in my life, I go, I can help you not have to do that. And so much of this is designed to help with that.
Yeah, to your point, Ahmad, of saying, things have to be accessible. Things have to be practical. People have to be able to use it, right, immediately. This is one of the things that we've learned how to do, how to take this rich, powerful system and use it in a very practical, world of where the bottom line is the bottom line. But teams have absolutely loved it, and we've had, if people think it's like, well, you must have watered it down. No, what we do is we change the language to make it very like their language instead of our language. That's what we do. So, which is why it works. But Jim and I both have, we work with C-suite, a lot of C-suite people, in large companies, one that's a Fortune 100 company. And these people that we're working with are very successful. And when we're talking with them or typing them, it is not uncommon for them to begin to open up, for them to begin to cry even on calls with us, and to walk away saying, this has been one of the most transformative and powerful conversations I've had. And so as a result, they go back to work and they're a bit different. And then working with teams in ways that brings the powerful tool of the Enneagram to helping them understand, how do I use this to work more collaboratively, because we're not working collaboratively. How do we align around goals? How do we deal with internal conflict or the avoidance of conflict, which is a lot of what we run into? What about safety, psychological safety in this organization, right? How do we create that? And so we're doing that through the Enneagram, but in a way that's immediately practical, immediately usable. And so that's what we're going to be passing on in this next iteration of, not iteration because it'll be a separate, but a different certification or add-on, I think is what we'll do. So that's what we're doing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So how do we learn more about the art of growth?
You can go to www.theartofgrowth.org to find out all the, I think they get a snapshot of who we are now. It's just like, I mean, we're also like, you can shoot us a message, like, well, I'll answer, I'll do my best to answer, you've got a group of people you want to say, hey, we'd love to go through something like this. Like, shoot us a message. We'll jump on the phone for a couple minutes and we'll talk about it. We'll see what it looks like for you. That's about it.
That's awesome. Awesome. Thank y'all for your time, man. I enjoyed being on this side, getting to interview you guys for once and get to know y'all on a deeper level. So I would love, when time permits, man, y'all come back. We can go deeper into the instincts.
What's so funny, Joel was talking about our unique take on that, but I was like, which we learned from doing the panel series, 27 panels of the instincts, where, and having over 10,000 people take that instincts test and then have dialogues with lots of them in order to get to those panels to produce this, that we now have someone combing through it and taking some of the learnings out so we can put it in book form or something else. So, like, again, we're just the conduit of this.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ahmad. I really appreciate you as a person. I'm a big fan of you, and really appreciate the invite and getting to have a conversation. This just felt like a conversation with a friend. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. This is Total Confidence Podcast. Two great guys, Jim and Joel, the art of growth.
Those guys
appreciate y'all. Look, I feel so funny doing this, like my podcast. We used to have a conversation that's going to my podcast thing or whatever. But
No, it's
thank you.
totally cool. Yeah, I just keep it light. We make fun of ourselves, you know.